My name's Tom Hucker. I serve on the Montgomery County Council. I'll be introducing several other speakers to offer their perspective on this crucial and timely matter affecting our voting rights. But first, let me try to frame why we're here. Voting, obviously, is the cornerstone of our democracy. Easy access to voting, both convenient locations and hours, is essential to ensuring the greatest participation and the fairest elections. Since we started it in 2010, early voting has proven to be both an effective and popular way to increase participation. Back then, in 2010, there were only 5 early voting sites, and only 8.4% of the population, of the votes cast in the general election were cast in early voting, 8.4%. But by last year, we had 11 early voting sites, and early voting has more than tripled as a percentage, with now up to 27.8% of the total votes. Yes, that's worth clapping for. So clearly, early voting has been a success, not only in Montgomery County, but around the country. So there is no reason that we can see why we wouldn't want to expand from 11 sites to 12 sites as now allowed by state law. The county council, the county executive, and the county delegation to Annapolis all asked the Montgomery County Board of Elections to add a 12th site and to add it right here at the White Oak Recreation Center. Now, why White Oak? First, demographics. The White Oak area is home to many low-income voters, many African American and immigrant voters, and many seniors who don't have cars. Up to 35% of adults in this area don't have a car. Many voters rely then on transit, especially buses, and it takes a long time to take a bus either to downtown Silver Spring or to Praisner. If you're in a car from White Oak to the Praisner Rec Center, you get there in 13 minutes. The same trip, White Oak to Praisner by bus, takes 41 minutes, and the bus only leaves every half an hour. Second reason is our experience. As you can see from these 2 maps right behind everyone here, some of the biggest early voting turnout in the county last year was in East County, coinciding with some of the longest waits to vote as well. On Election Day in 2016, I was called up to the Praisner Community Center in Burtonsville because there was a wait of up to 2 hours to vote there. And while I was there, I talked to many voters in line. I obviously had the opportunity to talk to a lot of them. Many had to leave without voting that day because they had to pick up kids from school or childcare, or because they were seniors or disabled and they just couldn't stand up for 2 hours. And that should never be happening. It's inexcusable in the richest state in the country and in a country that prides itself on its democracy. Totally avoidable wait lines are completely unacceptable, and there's no excuse for them to be happening, particularly in Montgomery County. Now, this is a Montgomery County problem. This is not really a national problem. Nationally, the average wait time to vote in 2016 was only 8 minutes, according to an MIT study. The Presidential Commission on Election Administration has committed to a national goal to limit wait times to no more than 30 minutes ever. And here we have 2-hour waits in Montgomery County. And finally, putting an early voting site here at White Oak will relieve pressure on the long lines in Silver Spring and Burtonsville and this whole area on Election Day itself as well. But despite the clear direction from the county council, the county executive, and the House delegation, the Board of Elections completely refused. It's their job to make voting easier, and clearly they don't understand their job to miss this opportunity and refuse to go along with our direction. So why? Why did the board ask for our recommendation and then once they had it, reject it? Well, it's hard to know, but it's clear some of them are unfamiliar with Montgomery County. One board member even said, "Why would we put it in White Oak? We may as well put it on the moon." On the moon. I want to believe that the board chair and his colleagues were confused and didn't realize how important this is to our community. But we also know that there's a well-developed national Republican strategy of voter suppression happening all across the country. Voter ID laws, elimination of early voting, and even fining and jailing people in other states just for registering voters. We also know this isn't the first time that this Board of Elections tried to suppress early voting in East County. This is mostly the same group who voted to end early voting at the Praisner Center back in 2015. And upon questioning, they admitted that their strategy was created in an illegal closed meeting with a state Republican strategist. Now, I worked with many of the folks here to organize the effort to overturn that decision by the county board and to overturn it by the state board to restore early voting at the Praisner Center. Common sense prevailed, and the numbers bear out that we were right at that time. 10,000 people voted at Praisner during the last election, 10,000. So we were right and the county board was wrong. And that's why we need the county board to reverse their decision again, or the state board to overrule them and create the early voting center right here at White Oak. I don't want to believe that this is partisan in motivation and driven by a desire to make it harder for people to vote. So the county board has really one choice to prove that. Let common sense prevail now too and reverse last week's decision. But we're running out of time. So Chairman Jim Shallak and the county board, we're all calling on you to hold an emergency meeting this Monday on the state's deadline for accepting early voting site recommendations from the counties and add White Oak as our 12th early voting site. The voters of Montgomery County depend on you to provide fair and accessible elections every 2 years, so don't let them down. Thank you. Let me bring up House Majority Leader Eric Lukey.
Thank you, everyone, for coming out today. I'm Eric Lukey. I'm a delegate representing District 14 in Montgomery County. I'm the House Majority Leader. I was the lead sponsor of the legislation that authorized Montgomery County to add a 12th early voting site. And the reason I did it is because the voters have shown with their feet that they want more early voting opportunities. Every single election cycle since early voting began in Maryland, more and more Maryland voters, more and more Montgomery County voters have shown up to early voting. And as Tom mentioned, it is incredibly important for populations of our residents that don't have access to cars, that have disabilities, that are seniors, to be able to have the flexibility that early voting provides, because voting is the most fundamental right in our democracy. Without voting, none of the other rights we hold can exist. So for this board, this Republican-dominated board, to vote not to allow a 12th early voting site when there is so obviously a need is unacceptable. It's a dereliction of duty on their part. So I'm adding my voice, along with the members of the Montgomery County delegation to the House of Delegates, to Tom's voice and the county executive's voice, asking for the Board of Elections to reverse its decision to authorize a 12th early voting site. And I'm also calling on our governor, Larry Hogan, who appointed these members to this board, to call them and tell them that he too believes that voting is a fundamental right and that voters right here in White Oak should have access to it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Delegate Lukey. She's got to run as well. Let me call up Delegate Laurie Cooney from District 20.
Good morning. I'm Laurie Cooney, and I represent this district, District 20, proudly in the General Assembly. And I want to begin by saying that I love White Oak, and I want to invite anyone who thinks that White Oak is the moon to come and join me here for a little tour and maybe a meal. So that is an open invitation. Hopefully I'll be taken up on that. We may or may not be able to have that tour before Monday, so let me just say, if it doesn't happen before Monday, I just want to urge the Board of Elections to reverse their decision. It's very clear, as has been said. Voting is a fundamental right. Across this country, we have seen the Republican Party take steps to disenfranchise more and more voters. We're backsliding on the progress that we've made over the last 50 years, and it is unacceptable that here in Montgomery County we would have a Board of Elections that is disenfranchising this particular community. This community has majority people of color, large immigrant community, lower income community, folks who are dependent on transit in order to get to multiple jobs that they have to work. And while it's incumbent on all of us to build an economy where people don't have to work multiple jobs and build a transit system where people can actually get places quickly, in the meantime, we need to make sure that folks can vote to keep putting those of us into office who are committed to doing those things. We need to protect people's voting rights, and we need to make sure that voting is accessible and easy. And the clearest way to do that right now in Montgomery County is to establish this site as an early voting site. So again, I stand with my colleagues. I urge the board to reverse their decision, and I welcome the visit.
Thank you, Delegate Charcuti, and drive safe. We're so glad to have the enthusiastic support of our County Executive, Mark Elrich.
When this is all over, I want to sit down with the board and give them a reading lessons and how to read a letter. I was very clear I wanted to open up the site. And this is really important that we have this. I was in Silver Spring. I saw the lines of people. I saw people leaving who said, I can't wait any longer. The good thing was the people who said that mostly told me they were going to try to come back, but they had the luxury of being able to come back. If you've tried to squeeze out time out of your workday to come once and you've waited an hour and you realize you can't stay anymore and you got to get back, if you're working the rest of the day, you may not get a second opportunity to vote. And I think, until this country adopts voting as a national holiday, which is it really ought to be, you need to increase the opportunities for people to participate in this political system. So everything Tom said is absolutely true. We've got the opportunity to do this. We've got state legislation that recognized the need and said Montgomery County should do this. So we've done our part. We need the board to do its part. This is an important election, and we can't have people sidelined during this election. So, and that may not be in the interest of some members of the board. But the truth is that we do need to get everybody out to vote who can get to vote, and having this center is going to help us. It is going to make a difference. This community is more transit dependent than a lot of other communities are, and we need to do the right thing. The board needs to do the right thing. We've carried our part of the bargain. They need to carry their part of the bargain. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, County Executive. Let me call up my colleague, Councilmember Will Jawando.
Thank you, Councilmember Hucker and County Executive, and to our Majority Leader, Eric Lukey, and my delegate, Laurie Cooney, here in District 20. I'm a resident of East County. I live about a mile down the road, and I too witnessed these lines. And when we talk about voting as a fundamental right, I think it's important that we remember that it wasn't always a right that was accrued to everybody. It was just a few weeks ago that in the council we commemorated the first set of documented slaves being brought to this country 400 years ago in 1619. It wasn't until 250 years later, in 1869, that the 15th Amendment was passed, guaranteeing the right to all citizens to vote, regardless of their race. And here we are, all male citizens, good point. All males, very good point. And here we are in 2019. 150 years after the passage of the 15th Amendment, still trying to guarantee that right to vote to all citizens, regardless of who they are, what they look like. It's not lost upon me that right to our right here are thousands of residents, mostly black, African, immigrant residents, who are being today denied the right to vote by this Republican board. Let's call it what it is. This is disenfranchisement. This is voter suppression. This is what they are doing. And we know that because they tried to do it a couple years ago. Before I was elected, I stood with Tom and others to say that we needed to restore Praisner and make sure that that center kept open. They've been trying to do this over and over again. You look at the maps behind me, it's not an accident. We know where folks live. We know that they are dependent on transit. We know who these people are in this community, in my community. And so we need to send a loud voice to this board and to the governor and say, be like Abraham Lincoln. You always talk about him. Be like him and say that everyone has the right to equal access. Everyone has the right to vote, and that you want people to vote. Win with your ideas. Don't win with suppression. That's my message today. So I'm proud to say, stand with my colleagues, and I hope that the board will listen to this impassioned plea from the residents and from our community leaders. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Will. Next up, State Senator Susan Lee is here.
Thank you. Hello, I'm Senator Susan Lee. I'm also the Senate Majority Whip. I'm very delighted to be here with my colleagues here and all the community activists. This is so important that we have White Oak as an early voting site. We really need to have it, especially now with the increase in attacks against immigrants, women, LGBTQ, and also persons of all diverse backgrounds, with gun violence becoming, unfortunately, the norm, and with now challenges to our very democracy. This is going to be the most important election of our time in 2020. And I have spoken to all our communities all over Montgomery County and Maryland, and they want to vote. They want to have their voices heard. And we want the Board of Elections to know we want White Oak as a early voting site. Because as all my colleagues have said, there has been an increase in voting when there is an early voting site. We need to have this. This is a no-brainer. So I just want the board to hear, we want White Oak as an early voting site, and this is common sense. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Senator Lee. Apparently, there's a lot happening at the U.S. House of Representatives, so Congressman Raskin couldn't be with us today, but we're so pleased that his district director, Kathleen Connor, is with us.
Thanks, Tom. Congressman Raskin really appreciated the invitation to be here. As Tom mentioned, he's a little busy. He asked me to personally thank Tom for organizing this and highlighting this. In typical Congressman Raskin fashion, he wrote his own words for today. So he just sent me he asked me to share the following with you. Voting is the foundation and lifeblood of our democracy. It's our duty to provide easy access to all voters, and the ability to vote is a fundamental right. Voters in East Montgomery County have limited early voting options and have experienced long wait times. This is easily addressed by adding a 12th voting site. I strongly encourage the Montgomery County Board of Elections to promote strong democracy and universal participation in our elections by adding this early voting site. Thanks.
Thank you, Kathleen. Let me call up Joanne Antoine, the Executive Director of Common Cause Maryland. Thank you.
Good morning, and thank you to Councilman Hucker for inviting us here today to support the council, the county executive, the delegation, and more importantly, the community members in their efforts to establish an additional early voting site here in White Oak. Now, for those who aren't familiar with Common Cause, we are a nonpartisan watchdog organization that has been working in the state for just about 50 years now to create a more participatory democracy, one in which the voices of all Marylanders are heard, and in this case where eligible voters are easily and securely able to make their voices heard on election day. And as you all know, Maryland is known around the country for being a leader on election reform, right? We've recently passed initiatives like same-day registration, automatic voter registration, and more, but we still got a lot of work to do in terms of making sure everyone has access to the ballot. You know, in the past, we've supported efforts to establish early voting locations here in the county. It seems like it's a regular thing at this point. And we've been doing so because we want to make sure that voting is easy for eligible individuals. You know, in 2018, our DC office helped to oversee the Our Vote election protection program, and most of the calls that we got from Maryland were in regards to long lines, people being concerned that they weren't going to be able to have their voices heard. And we found ourselves in situations where on election day, after covering polls for same-day registration, where we were going to different polling locations to try and get people to stay online. And when we were having conversations with them, a lot of them expressed the fact that during early voting, they had to leave and they were left with only this one option to go vote on election day. And even still, some of them were finding themselves in positions where they had to leave and missed out on voting. Montgomery County has an opportunity to get ahead of that as we're preparing for the 2020 elections, where we know that there will be an overwhelming number of voters that come out and have their voices heard. So again, I stand with the community in urging the local Board of Elections to side with us, right, to support the creation of establishing this additional polling location and helping to ensure that no one is left behind. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Joanne. Let me call up Julio Murillo from Casa Action.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you. Good morning. My name is Julio Murillo with Casa Action. Casa Action is the largest electoral community organization in the Mid-Atlantic region fighting for immigrant rights. And I want to first of all thank Councilmember Tom Hucker, County Executive Elrich, and our state delegates for being here today for this important issue. As I mentioned before, this is a community, a low-income community, an immigrant community, a community of color that automatically already has challenges voting and get into the polls. So we are joining everybody here with the advocates to demand that the Board of Elections do the right thing, stay true to their mission, and allow or make it easier for every single eligible voter to vote. I just want to share very briefly, a lot of our work in Casa Action, we go door knocking in communities like White Oak, and we know firsthand the challenges that folks face. And not having an early voting location here makes it that much more difficult. And then lastly, this is a message to the Board of Elections that your mission is to ensure that every voter has the opportunity to vote. Please take into consideration every single voter, especially those with additional challenges. So thank you, Councilmember Hucker, for your effort.
Thank you, Julio. We have many neighbors affected by this bad decision by the Board of Elections. Let me call up David Fein with the Friends of White Oak.
Thank you, Tom. I'd like to begin by thanking both our county council representative and the county executive for this wonderful facility here. This is a community gathering place. This is the logical place to have a voting ballot place. I am a 20-year resident of this area. I live 2 blocks away from here, so this is pretty personal for me. My wife works in Rockville, and it takes her oftentimes an hour to get home. So if she works till 7 or 8 at night, early voting is really important. I am a board member of the Friends of White Oak. I'm a graduate of Leadership Montgomery. I've been involved in my community. I'm the president of the Gatestone Homeowners Association, and I have knocked every residence in my community. And I can tell you that many of my neighbors are new citizens, many of them are immigrants, and many of them are people of color. And I really believe that every vote counts. I had a conversation a couple days ago with a friend of mine. I worked in Detroit for 7 years, and this friend of mine from the Detroit Free Press reminded me that the vote in Michigan was decided by 0.2%. So what I want to emphasize today is that every vote counts, and it's very important that this be changed and this be a polling place. Thank you very much.
Terrific. Thank you, David. Let me call up Diana Conway with the Montgomery County Democratic Women's Club.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Diana Conway. I'm here on behalf of the 700 men and women of the Montgomery County Women's Democratic Club. I'm here to object to the Board of Elections' decision not to open this early voting site. The reasons they gave are a little suspect. They said, can't afford it, not fiscally responsible, not needed. How much does it cost? $117,000. $117,000. Why is it not needed? It is needed. Look at those lines. That is outrageous. Suppression of votes, of some votes, is not all right in this country. That is not what we are about. And the line of where those votes are, as shown on these maps, and who is affected, as you've already heard, is very disturbing. If 2018 was such a mess at the existing 11 sites, and even the Wall Street Journal, Fortune magazine, Forbes, the New York Times are predicting a massive increase in voting turnout, what's going to happen in 2020? For the Board of Elections to say this is not needed is insane. The reaction when I was sitting there watching them vote was that those predictions are, quote, conjecture. I also wanted to say that the idea that we cannot afford this is an absolute insult to our democracy. The priorities of this community is to give people access to the ballot. It's their constitutional right. We have members of our community, others to tell you that those votes will not count. It is the duty of the Board of Elections to run a secure and accessible election. So let's give our neighbors access to their constitutional right to vote, and let's get a 12th voting site at White Oak. Thank you.
Thank you, Diana. We have a lot of supporters here. I want to acknowledge a number of others. Pat Drumming, Senior Minister with the Rainbow Community Church, is here. Thank you for being here. Dolly Kildee is here with SEIU Local 500. Bernie Carnes is here from the Calverton Civic Association. And we're so glad Elaine McCabe could join us from Congressman Sarbanes' office. Anybody else on there? Okay, that needs to be recognized? Okay. Anybody else want to come up? Okay. And I also want to make sure everybody watching knows that we have a statement from the NAACP Montgomery County branch. They couldn't join us because they're at work, but I'll just read you a couple highlight sentences. As the NAACP, we would be remiss if we failed to acknowledge that the fact of the Board of Elections' failure to add a site at White Oak is also a failure to ameliorate long lines, insufficient polling places, and other structural impediments to voting. To knowingly permit the continued existence of such impediments is simply an attempt to suppress the vote. to suppress the vote in this African American and African immigrant growth area. We know that the need to encourage voter participation and encourage active civic engagement in areas where traditionally disenfranchised people reside is critical to promote democracy, and we know that meaningful access to the ballot is the essence of our democracy. Therefore, we call upon the Board of Elections to immediately reverse its decisions and approve an early voting site in White Oak. So thank you to the NAACP. All right, you can see we have broad and deep support for this decision. We're calling on the Board of Elections to reverse this decision, to call an emergency meeting on Monday, and if that fails, for the State Board of Elections to reverse them, as they did in 2015. Thank you all for coming today. I very much appreciate it. Pardon me? Daniel, oh, did we skip? I'm so sorry. We skipped Daniel Koroma. I skipped. When I say we, I mean me. Skip Daniel Koroma, East County activist, on the fold here.
Well, let me thank the elected officials who are here. I'm just here to tell a story about my neighbors. I'm a longtime resident of East County, specifically White Oak. The journey for many of my neighbors is that they have a 7 a.m. to 3 p.m. job, and then from there they go to their 4:30, their second job, which starts around 4:30 to 11 p.m. And so basically what happens is that weekends are the only days that they could vote. Even with early voting, the closest early voting site at Presner, there's no public transportation. You've already heard from other speakers about the bus. It does not run on Saturdays or Sundays. So there's no way that my neighbors would go and vote. They have to walk 1 mile from where the bus will put them down on Briggs Cheney Road to go to Presner to vote. Or if they go down to Silver Spring, it takes about an hour and a half, and then they have to stand in line again for another hour. So can you imagine a single mother who works 2 jobs a day, 5 days a week, the only day that they know is a right to vote because people have died for this right, and they leave their child with a babysitter to go down to Silver Spring Civic Building. It takes, again, an hour and a half. You take another 1 hour to vote, and then about another hour and a half to come back to White. That's almost 4 hours of the day. So I'm asking the Montgomery County Board of Election, these are the stories that you may not have heard that day when you're making your decision, but these are the people that will be directly impacted if you make the right decision. So I'm asking, in fact, I'm pleading on behalf of my neighbors that you make this site an early voting site. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Daniel. Are there any questions before we adjourn? Great. Thank you all so much for coming.